Hello, I'd like to give you an update here on the development of the CS1 game engine. This started out as a project that was intended to make it easier for some middle school students to make 3D multiplayer games and to also integrate them with some IoT devices. So this started in its earliest form 2 years ago. Um, I decided to go ahead and incorporate it in a high school course introducing students to programming through game development. And I have since found enough success with it to say, okay, now it's time to really back up, use some software architecture and engineering best practices, and build this thing so that it can service a larger community, meaning even commercial production application developers, as well as meet educators' needs in a more meaningful way. So let me just tell you a little bit about the project here in terms of the road to 1.0, and then we'll look at some other aspirations as well, and then jump into the development system, which I think is interesting as well. So, the way that I like to think and organize my thoughts at the onset of any project is to say, okay, what are the API promises that I'm going to make to the consumers of this project? Provided that it's going to be, I'm going to be servicing other developers, right? If I was just facing lay consumers with no code type of interfaces, then it would be different. Then I would have more starting off with user stories and designs and so forth. But since my consumer base is going to be a set of developers, I want to start off my development process by defining some API promises. And I want to be as articulate about those promises as I can from the onset. So let's take an overview here. First, these promises define the minimum developer contract, which will be fulfilled by one or more of the CS1 game engine packages by the 1.0.0 release. So here's basically the set of promises I am making as I endeavor towards 1.0. So the first thing is that the developers who are making their games, their applications with this game engine, will be able to choose a game type of one of these three categories, either single player with authentication and database, or multiplayer with authentication and database. So why having something that's just single player? Well, maybe you just want to throw something, a little experience together, a game-like experience or a 3D, experience that's kind of amplifying or accentuating some other greater, scope of need. And maybe it's in your blog and you're going to highlight something that you're blogging about, and you don't want to get too, right? You don't want to get overly involved in developing some crazy, commercial application. In which case, you might just want to make, hey, I want to make a little single player game that will let people kind of dwell on some concept that I'm presenting or some product, and then I can just embed it, maybe even embed it within a web page or something like that, like a blog. I just use that as an example. And of course, single player with authentication and database, and multiplayer with authentication and database. I will say that the first version of the game engine will only be using a flat file database. I'm not putting a whole bunch of uh, thought and detail into the database layer at this point. I'm not even building any adapters for the different databases or database services at this point. I'm simply using a flat file store database. I'm using LowDB initially. So that I just want to get that out of the way. Um, so that part of developing the production, commercial grade, production ready application will be something that early adopters, the 1.0 adopters, will have to kind of build out themselves. But when we get to the road to 2.0, we'll see that I'll have some other things built in, such as adapters. The second promise I'm making here on the road to 1.0 is the easy avatar management. Okay, I want to be able to provide, first of all, Blender templates for custom avatars. I want to give also some community avatars that are readily available out of the box in a default avatar or two or three. Allow customization of avatar animations, have a certain set of avatar animations that are expected, like an idle in a walk, if you will, and have an easy way to add animations in and to easy way to actually control the animations within the events of your game. The next thing I would like to do, and I will do, I'm promising to do by the 1.0.0 release, is to have very easy camera control. Now, let me just put this out there right now. This engine at this point is still early. It's still experimental. So right now I'm tightly bound to using A-frame and 3JS, which is the rendering engine under the hood, which is on top of WebGL. But as I go through different iterations of this engine down the road, I plan on building out adapters and decoupling from the underlying frameworks and rendering engines and so forth that are currently kind of hardwired in there at this point. But for right now, for the 1.0, we're going to have A-frame and 3JS as the entity component system framework, if you will, and the rendering engine. That said, and why I bring that up is, A-frame already provides a nice declarative way to access like the camera and so forth. They have a nice way to add components, even though they're not kind of pure. They're not pure components in terms of an entity component system. You can write them fairly purely, but they're not reinforced. You'd have to maybe put some TypeScript over it and reinforce it to be more pure in terms of entity component system purity. I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole. What I do want to do is make it easy for people to declare the kinds of cameras they want, basically first person or third person. If they're going to do it third person, I want them to be able to easily set the camera offset and set the avatar opacity and be able to transition between camera states. So you can have a game that's literally at sometimes like third person and then goes into first person view dynamically and easily. All right, the next promise for or along the road to 1.0 is this idea or this concept of multimodal development, right? Partly because I want this to be a flexible developer experience, and partly because I want this to be a very good onboarding for students of computer science. So if they're learning web development, you would want them to write some HTML as well as JavaScript, and perhaps CSS as well. But for right now, I want you to be able to, and what I'm meaning by multimodal development is I want you to be able to like combine like a declarative HTML approach that A-frame does a very good job at providing that basic developer interface, and then just of course the JavaScript coding. And I want this to be easily achieved. I don't want to require that you're doing HTML and JavaScript. If you only want to do HTML, you have some very simple type of things that you're designing or prototyping the way something looks, you should be able to just jump in there in just only HTML and get something up and going. Or maybe you don't want any HTML kind of like tags in the page necessarily, or minimal. Then you can have it only JavaScript. So at this point, you can get quite minimal with it. You can just literally have like a script tag loading in the engine, for example, and then in the body you can have a custom script tag that I call the CS1 script, and I'll go over that a little bit later. So this multimodal development, easy. If you feel like just writing some HTML, you should be able to just do that, no problem. If you feel like just writing some JavaScript and writing it right in the web page, that's fine. If you want to roll it up in the bundle, that's fine too. You have all these avenues towards getting your development builds and production builds, for that matter, out there without having to go down some narrow hallway of development. So kind of like a broad set of options in terms of how you develop your app. The next promise is that it's going to be able to install as a PWA, progressive web application. That means that you'll have access to all the things that a service worker could provide you in terms of being able to like proxy requests to the server, be able to go to cache, and see that it's updating right there. I'm on glitch, so it does these things. So let me get down here a little bit further. So installs as a PWA means that, hey, you're going to be able to have people installing your application on their phones. And it will be able to cache and have even offline functionality. Of course, if it's multiplayer, you're going to have to accommodate for certain things, and I'll try to make that as easy as possible to have an online and an offline experience. You'll have asset caching, and that will avoid all those round trips and reaching out to this game server or CDN for assets. If you have those fresh assets and they're not stale in the cache, then everything should just work fine. So having it install as a PWA without even you having to think about it is another cool thing. I even dynamically generate the service worker with the server package. So we'll talk about the packages that comprise the CS1 that complement the CS1 game engine. I should actually say the CS1 project involves several packages, and I'll also go into that here in a moment. The next promise on the road to 1.0 is having an extensible kind of system. In other words, and at this point, I'm basically saying, hey, yeah, under the hood, it has A-Frame and 3JS. So if you already know A-Frame, and or 3JS, then hey, you can just jump into this and do your thing, and you'll get a lot of extra things on top of that. You'll get multiplayer networking, you'll get the PWAs on top of that, and you'll get a bunch of other customized kind of components in there on top of it. So down the road, when I kind of abstract away the underlying ECS framework, entity component system framework, and rendering engine, and I no longer require that you use A-Frame necessarily or ECS, but that will be again down the road. At that point, I would still want it to be extensible, but I will kind of provide an API for extending it that wouldn't rely necessarily on 3JS or A-Frame. So, but that's not part of 1.0. Again, like I said, with 1.0, I'm hardwired to 3JS and A-Frame. Let's go to the next of the promises here on the road to 1.0, and that's having a very well thought out global object. And I know it's been horror stories all throughout computer science history and programming history in terms of global namespaces that are exposed, and how those are just like so crazily just ad hoc conglomerations of properties and methods or functions, or whatever, that are all put onto some global namespaced object. Well, I'm hopefully reminding myself, at least, that as I go through this process on the road to 1.0, that I am being very careful as to what I'm exposing here to the developer in terms of this CS1 global object. I'm thinking about the semantics involved, what words am I using, and I'm thinking about, kind of things like build some overloading possibilities into the functions, so you can get have a lot more avenues of approach to doing different things. So yes, you can simulate overloading of functions in JavaScript. And that kind of gives you a lot more power in being a consumer, and it also gives you some creative ways of even designing libraries and so forth. If you design your interface to include kind of like overloaded methods or functions. So that being said, that's what I think about when I'm going into the CS1 global object. The next thing over here is I want you to be able to access A-frame components and 3JS, the object 3Ds, anytime. Okay, what do I mean anytime? Well, I mean that you should be able to write script right into the HTML. Now, this guarantee is only going to be made if you're writing your script inside of my special custom CS1 script element. Okay, so I am using a custom element, CS1 script, that when you're writing inside of that script rather than a conventional script tag, you are guaranteed, you don't have to worry about the cascade of events, all the setup that happens at the beginning, all of that kind of, hydration, if you will, of, properties getting the data and things like that need to be in place before your game logic really kicks in. So I want that thought of, all of this, if you will, bootstrapping of the framework to be a non-issue. I don't want that startup and the cascade of events. I don't want you to get into some weird a bunch of race issues, because sometimes you get into these systems and you realize, hey man, this is awesome, this is great, and then all of a sudden you get into production, you're getting all of these errors that are due to kind of these race conditions that happen here and there. I'm going to try to, as much as possible, make that not a thing to worry about, provided that you use the abstractions that I provide to provide those safeguards. All right, so that's what this is about. That's that promise. I think it can take a large set of developer headaches out of the way. And the last one I have here in terms of promises on the way to 1.0.0 is having an intuitive peer-to-peer system. So since it does have a multiplayer as an option, going back over here to the road choice of the game type, if you are going to do a multiplayer game type, then I want you to be able to use peer-to-peer communication. I don't want you necessarily to have peer-to-peer connections if you don't want, or if your subnet doesn't allow that kind of communication. But I want an intuitive peer-to-peer system for the context of this game development kind of environment to be there for you. So I should probably say at this point that all of the APIs that are underlying these promises are intended to introduce, properties and methods and custom elements that all fit nicely into a DSL or domain-specific language, where that domain is game development. That is the game development environment. So within that environment of developing games, there is some industry kind of standard language that's used. Okay, I want to expose that language in the most common sense, and put that as the name of, like, for example, as for property names and method names and so forth. So, and that's probably what I will put a lot of time. I try to do that best I can as I'm kind of building it out. But as I get closer and closer to 1.0.0, I'm going to do some really good surveys. I'm going to throw out all the naming conventions, all the names, property and method names, and so forth. I'm going to throw this out in the community. I'm going to say that this is what the name of this property is, this is what the name of this method is, and I'm going to get some feedback from people who work in the game development industry and say, does this really jive with what you would expect of to return? What kind of data you'd expect to get from a property of this name if you call get on that property, or if you call a certain method named X, whatever. Does this make sense according to your domain knowledge as to uh, what I'm giving you and what you would expect to get? So I'm going to try to be as respectful of what's actually out there in the community right now in that domain of game development. So that rounds out the promises for the 1.0.0 release. Now, honestly, I did mention that I'm shooting to get this done this summer, all of this. Um, I am the sole developer of this at this point, and I do have other things to do as well. I'm planning some courses. I teach high school as well. I'm planning some courses for the fall. In particular, I'm trying to bolster like a machine learning curriculum for an industrial coding class, and I'm trying to make that have just the right touch points at the right level and so forth. So I don't know. I'm saying everything has to fit within its compartment of kind of time and priority that I have set aside. I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage to get this entire set of promises fulfilled by the end of the summer. I'm hoping to. I am definitely hoping to. That said, if you're checking this out along the way, I don't even have an MVP yet that I'm going to say for this version, uh, this rewrite of the engine. Um, but if you want to check out the old CS1 game engine, which got up to, I believe, 0.7.22, things are definitely, a lot of that is breaking. That was all centered around pretty much helping my classes learn in a high school setting. Um, Maybe there were a few people in industry that were using it for prototyping some stuff, but this is the real first legitimate swing at this by doing this from the get go with a more organized process. All right, so that's the road to 1.0. Take a little look see forward from that. The road to 2.0 is right here. So I only put a couple things. Basically, the road to 2.0 comes up when people ask for things, or I kind of say, hey, that would be cool to add, but then I have to bite my lip and say, no, that's going to go next time around. Or somebody else asks me, hey, could you do this? Could you, you know, like last time around with the CS1 game engine, the previous iteration of it, I just had some, for example, with the Arduino, I had a couple scripts that were out there, a couple Arduino sketches, if you will, and I posted them on GitHub. And those work fine for a very specific kind of hardware set. Um, but I do want to have more robust kind of IoT, PLC, if you will, kind of support for this. And you're saying, well, why would you want to have such why would you want like an IoT integration for a game engine? Well, um, I'm presuming a lot of these games might be serious games used in industry where they're actual kind of used for simulating or real-time representing real-time representation of systems and so forth. And data from those systems might be coming in via um, socket streams or polling, you know, puts to a database from little embedded devices that might be sensors and so forth. So I'm looking at this in terms of games. I'm also thinking serious games, like even like simulations and so forth. So if you were just thinking like, hey, whatever you were thinking, if it's Flappy Bird or 3D games that you were thinking about. No, I think a little bit broader when I'm saying game engine for that much. And then also even just regular old games, not even serious games, just entertainment games nowadays will utilize like machine learning models at different points, either on the server side or in the client side. So for 2.0, integration of machine learning models, I am going to try to target that by developing some utility functions that will kind of augment the kind of like the wrapper code for WASM. WebAssembly, if you're not familiar with that, is a way of kind of taking native code, like you wrote something in C++ or in Rust or other language that typically used for designing like system level programs, and taking that code and being able to churn out a very high performance binary that can actually run in a web browser or run on a server, with a little wrapper around it where you can, and then API like this, kind of like this interface, communication interface between like the JavaScript side and the WASM side. So I am waiting for more to evolve in the WASM community. So I'm definitely not going to go full hog on that until a couple things kind of pan out. But I want to provide support in 2.0 for uh, uh, making it really easy to support WASM powered physics engines and linear system solvers, and also just general machine learning models, like, whatever. You can just think, you name it, pretty much anything that you could define as a basic model that you would use for categorization or some other types of uses, and maybe some even natural language type of transformer based learning models that you're incorporating into a game. All right, so that's part of the road to 2.0. I made mention of the IoT integration. Another aspect of IoT integration could be if you're building custom controllers, like a custom, making your own kind of VR controller, or making your own just game controller like joystick. Maybe you're making your own custom wireless joystick, um, or any other kind of device that people use to interface with the game, and they can manipulate it. It could be also making your own device that integrates a soundboard for connecting your soundboard into the system. Um, so yeah, there's going to be a lot of thought that goes in and deciding how that gets built out. Again, that's why it's getting put ahead for the 2.0.0 release. And then finally, this idea of adapters, where I'm kind of abstracting these different kind of at this kind of a integration level. So I will do all of this kind of core work where I'm really just focusing on the basic, the core on 1.0, and in 2.0 I'm also going to be looking at abstracting the boundaries of the core with these adapters, where you can quickly use these adapters, just kind of fill out the form, if you will, for the adapter, and then you can kind of stick on third-party services, or connect to third-party services in very efficient manners. And it might be databases as a service. It might be whatever you name the third-party service you want to interface with. And I will also even make like a kind of like an adapt, so that there will be a base adapter class that you can even make custom adapters for. Because at that point, I'm hoping to have enough community members that are actually contributing to the project. That's another thing. about the 2.0 is I want to have enough in the 1.0 to convince people, hey, this is worth kind of diving into. And then at that point, hopefully, you can have some other people doing pull requests and churning out some code, churning out some commits for the 2.0 road. All right, a lot said right there, just going through these two different roads. Wanted to be thorough though. If anything, this will be provide a real sense of at least verbal documentation of what this project is about at this point. All right, so let's look at this environment. What is this page that you're looking at? What am I scrolling through? Well, this is Glitch. It's a website that basically has a little editor, like you might be familiar with, JS Fiddle or all these. There's so many sandboxes out there. There's REPL.it. There's you name it. There's a lot of these kind of online editors where you can host these little projects. And Glitch is one of those. It's a little bit more broader based. It gives you more of the more control than most of the others do in terms of you can go in and kind of pretty much edit the container to a certain extent that your project lives in. And you can thereby do a lot more kind of like powerful things in it than you would normally be able to do in like REPL.it or anywhere else, JS Fiddle, you name it. All right. So, but if you look out over here, I have at this point at the root right here, I do have maybe more than I should have in terms of files. I'm still kind of deciding in terms of the developer experience for me, for the actual library developer experience. If I get more people on board, I am definitely going to talk with them up at that point about making the contribution experience easier. I don't think it's hard to onboard at this point, so I'll kind of describe what I do to manage this system for the CS1 game engine packages. And let me start this kind of discussion of packages. So there are actually, what I want you to understand is there are several different packages that consumers of this engine can decide to use. At the bare minimum, you would be using solely the CS1 game engine package. So the CS1 game engine package, and if I go over here to an example, now I have it set up in my environment, I have a staging area, and if I look over here, this is not exactly minimal. I have some extra stuff in here, like some meta tags and so forth. And this is not the minimal example. I will add a minimal example a little bit. I have, I think, one over here on this side. But in the minimal sense, you would need the game engine script. Okay, so the game engine script in the head, and then you could put your bundled application into a CS1 script tag, custom script called a CS1 script tag. You can actually mention the path to that, the source of your game code, or you can just inline it inside of the, in the inner HTML of the CS1 script, which would be the really minimal onboarding. So in other words, all you really would need is to put, and maybe I can just do that live, a live code. Ooh, yeah. So let's add to the folder. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to call this min-hybrid. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to call it hybrid.html. So here's the basic idea. And we'll add that. So you could, and I'm just going to, of course, cheat a little bit by putting a copying here. So this is pretty much what you need here. And let me go over. And so this is a minimal example. This is not in the, this is a minimal example that is not a hybrid. So I do have that one there. But a min hybrid is going to be a little bit different. Actually, let me just copy the min example and I'll talk you through it. And I'll go to min hybrid. Typically, I would not put invalid HTML like this. You would need at least like a title tag and kind of like identifying the doc type and the title tag. So without the doc type and the title tag, it would be technically invalid HTML. But and you should probably be concerned about SEO, search engine optimization, and putting in the meta tags necessary to make that happen. But just want to get the point across about how minimal can you get if you really did want to. So let me just, if it's going to be a hybrid, what I mean by that is I'm saying let's not even worry about writing a separate file. In other words, we're going to inline, right? So we're just going to go over here. So the bare minimum, and this isn't going to add anything into it at all. It's going to be so CS1 dot game dot start, and I guess yes, okay, semicolon. All right, so that is really now that will just basically get you not not too much because you're not declaring anything in like a scene. If this was like an A-frame, if you wanted to do an HTML based thing, you could put an A scene in here. If you're familiar with A-frame, and inside this scene, you could put anything you want. You could put assets, you can put a box, these kind of primitives that A-frame exposes. So you could do all that declaratively as well, right off the bat. You could also do it down here imperatively in this kind of inline script before you start the game. Or you could just start the empty game. So I guess this would be to have the minimal CS1 game started. It's literally going to be blank. I guess it could give it a different like default background color or something so you know it's different than like the A-frame default. But at this point, this is a minimal hybrid. And this goes back to me explaining, all right, yeah, so this idea of this whole CS1 game engine being really a set of packages, and you're going to need at least the actual game engine package. So the CS1 game engine package, right, that is being imported right there, or being brought in via that standard script tag. And then we go ahead and call upon the CS1 game, which is defined obviously in the engine. And you don't have to bring in A-frame. I actually customize, don't even bring in A-frame because I have my own custom version of A-frame. So I go under the hood and I will put my own custom version of A-frame, which A-frame has a custom version of Three.js built into the default A-frame. So if you're not familiar with that. So I actually go in and make my custom versions of A-frame and I'll dig into the underlying Three.js and kind of rip out things and change a few things as well. So, but still pretty much, still keeping all the promises that A-frame makes and Three.js makes. I'm not really breaking their APIs that I have found at least. I don't think I'm breaking any of their APIs. So it should, and believe me, I've tried to break it at different points after I've edited different things. But all looks good so far. But it's very nice, right? You put this file in here, you don't have to worry about anything firing up in the order of things happening. You can access the CS1 global, and anything after it, you can access anything. For example, there will be like things like the CS1.myPlayer that represents your player in the game, and then the avatar for the player and all this other stuff. You'll be able to just access them without worrying about this web page kind of bootstrapping to the browser and so forth. You don't have to worry about the hydration of properties and receiving their data to actually become fully accessible to you. You're not going to be, calling anything on some null uh, property that, or you're not going to be doing anything of that nature or category of kind of like problems, or you're not going to encounter that category of problems. You just get to drop in the engine, nothing else even, and then just start coding against the engine right there. And you can do amazing stuff with just this kind of minimal. And you can just go in here and just start typing out stuff. You should be able to get some amazing results literally with starting off like this. Okay, so that's the minimal hybrid. That said, if you want, I have a build system that will work along with this with rollup. Of course, you can roll this into any other grander system that you want to. That's the nice thing. All of these are available as NPM packages. So you can build this as the engine, you can build on top of it, and so forth. So over here, if you were building your app and you had an app that was rather complex, that you would want to build it out into a whole bunch of modules that were nicely organized and so forth, and then you build it up. I'm going to have a system that I kind of support, development system using rollup, but if you want to use another system for pre-processing and for bundling, you are more than welcome to use Webpack or whatever. All right, but yeah. So and then you can just, after you build your bundle, then you can just access it. Actually, this is not a minimized bundle at this point. So this is in my staging area, which I don't minimize anything there. Even though it's not minimized, I still am generating source maps for them. So maybe it's a little extra work that I don't necessarily have to do. Just realize that, because I shouldn't be necessarily throwing those source maps in there if I'm not minimizing it. But so I'm always kind of catching little things that I can improve upon here. So, but in my in the public folder over here, I have a kind of what I call my production server. So whenever you are looking to have something that requires server authentication, like people sign in to your game, having persistent data, playing multiplayer or whatever, then you're going to need to have, the server package. So this is one of the packages that's going to be published. I will even make my demos that I make available as, like, you can use them as extensible kind of game starters. So and you'll just be able to install these different kind of like game starters from NPM as well. So I'm going to have more than just a couple, but there's a key set of base packages. And the one that you will definitely need is the game engine package. And what are the other packages? Well, if you look over here in my development server here, the other ones are the game server package and the game socket. The game socket package is separate because I want to keep that separate, because the socket is, and this is basically the client socket. So if you're using the server, you're going to be using a socket. So the socket kind of logic is already going to get built into the server. But if you're not using the server, and you're just using the game engine on the client, then you don't need any socket functionality. So in that case, it's not necessary to pack in all that extra code. So I make the CS1 game socket a separate sub project, if you will, and it will have its own npm repository as well. So when I'm designing these things, and currently right now as well, the socket, I am using socket.io. Maybe in the future I'll just use the raw WebSocket. Maybe I'll just build my own generic API and even move this whole thing out of the web development domain and move into a native kind of coding domain and just port the entire library from JavaScript to something else. I want as much of a smart decoupling of the different portions of this as I go forward. But anyway, so if you look in any of these kind of source subdirectories, I have kind of a standard setup here. I got, well, let me jump into the demo over here. So over here, you got the forest demo. You got like file, a main file, and that's kind of the entry point for the particular package. You have a README here, which at this point I didn't put a README on, but that README would end up showing up on the commit. It'll end up showing, I should say, on the publishing to npm, so that will show up there as well as the GitHub repository if you use that. And then I also start off with a modules directory. Here I have a version module that I think is a good thing to have. So anytime a module fires up, I like it to log the version. This file is actually dynamically created. It's not something you have to maintain yourself. I show in the main over here, you can see it's just, if you don't want to use it, you don't have to, but it's dynamically generated if you used my build system. So if you wanted to build your game, your CS1 game using this system that I use right here, then it would dynamically generate this version module for you, and then you can just import it and then do whatever. Here I just console log the version. But I try to put some nice kind of developer organizational patterns in place to make it easy for everybody as much as possible. Then I have a lib directory over here, because a lot of times you may want to rely on a certain third-party library, but you might want to just have it locally and bundle it in rather than serve it in addition to your game. Okay, maybe it's something that you're interfacing with. Maybe it's it's the client for some third-party service, and you want to go ahead and just put that in there, or whatever. Maybe it's some other library that you want to even change you get their build or their distribution. You might even want to change it before bundling it into your thing. So I just have a lib directory and why I do that myself, as you'll see here in the game engine subdirectory. In the game engine subdirectory, here's where I have a lib subdirectory right here. I have a module subdirectory. And under the modules, I have a vendor. Now, I have this vendor subdirectory here, and this is because this does, I do kind of take the A-frame library and I expose it as a module, so I just kind of grab the whole A-frame, right? I grab the whole A-frame right here, and I don't even have it minimized because I bundle it, and I just wrap the whole thing in a immediately invoked functional expression and just pass it in. And here I can easily change the underlying A-frame, which has bundled in it the underlying 3JS. So I can just jump into things right here. Pretty much the 3JS portion is really gobbledygook, but all the A-frame I can read. But I can go back and build the whole A-frame up from scratch if I needed to. But this is just a way, if I only have to hack on the A-frame part of this, I can hack on that and so forth, and kind of make little shortcuts and so forth as I see is necessary. And then over here I have in the modules. So everything here in the modules is supposed to be like essentially an ES6 module. So everything, following like the import export syntax. And then everything here in the vendor subdirectory is expected to be library maintained by some other vendor, some other group of people, even though I might kind of contribute to it. But it's not something that I am a core maintainer on. The ECS subdirectory stands for Entity Component System, which now I am using A-frame. Down in the future, on the road to 2.0, we'll look at having an adapter or actually writing in my own bare bones ECS implementation, and which is Entity Component System. Okay, so over here under ECS, I only have a couple bare bones things right now. This is like my third kind of rewrite project. So I have some other ones I'll be filling this in with more functionality. But right now, The way that I like to do it is I make these little templates, which are just like you're going to export, something, a named, you're going to export some type of named module, and then it's going to export as an IFI that's just going to call these. In this case, since it's in the entity component system folder, it's going to make these declarations, these registers, registering systems or components or primitives, which if you're familiar with A-frame or the abstractions that are part of their ECS, um, not all ECS files are going to have all of these. I just have this as a template. For example, the game. The game is actually, the CS1 game is actually a system. In the A-frame kind of context, right now, at least in the 1.0, it's just going to be an A-frame system. And this is the bare minimum, so you can kind of see how it's set up. So I wanted to show you at this point before I start dumping a whole bunch of other code into here, the basic architecture of this. Hopefully also to say, hey, that makes sense, and encourage some people to get on board with contributing. But yeah, so this ECS subfolder stands for Entity Component System. Anything that's outside of these two subfolders are just basic modules that are exported as ES6 modules that are basically invoked, immediately invoked functional expressions. So over here, we got this CS1 script module that defines this custom element called the CS1, basically the CS1 script element that you saw earlier. And then right now, I also have the CS1 module. So CS1 script is focusing on this idea of defining that script and everything within its kind of like space of what it should do. So I want good encapsulation, right? So over here, this is the CS1 module, and the CS1 module really what it's focused on here is defining that global CS1 object. So the initial declaration of the CS1 global object has these two properties on it at the beginning before any further hydration happens, where it gets the version and it gets the utils, and the utils are described in another module. And the utils right now literally only have two properties until I build up on it. I already have other ones built in different repos, but again, I just wanted to show you a really small snapshot of how this kind of builds out. But the load script, of course, I want some utilities. Now, I know A-frame already has an asynchronous load script utility in it. I can go on, I didn't rip it out yet of theirs. I did mine a little bit different. Of course, they did theirs with the promise as well, but I'm doing mine slightly different than their implementation. Asynchronous, kind of add an extra script. And that's great for me to learn too. So when I look at some utils that are built in the underlying 3JS or utils that are built into the A-frame framework, I'll go back and I'll read their source code. I'll say, is this the best fit for the DSL that I'm dealing with, the domain-specific language of game development? If not, maybe I'll just change the name of it, change the parameterization. Maybe I'll build some overloading into it so that it could take different sets of parameters and behave differently in different cases. So I'm trying to put a lot of thought into this usability, because what is code without a very good usable API, right? Even if at the end of the day you end up with highly performant code, if it's like terrible to develop with, you're probably not going to use it, right? So I want to be as thoughtful as possible. This libmap is really interesting. So libmap kind of goes along with this load script. If you haven't noticed, it's going to be like part of this system, as you will see. Not in this particular module, but there's another module that you will see maybe in a future video that I haven't loaded into here yet, because I don't want to overexpose you. And you're already like, wow, this is a lot. But no, this is just a little bit. I've already built this out a lot more. I've already kind of cleaned it out a lot. And went down to bare bones. So I want people to understand the system, and that's what I'm doing right now as I'm sharing with you. So it's actually built out farther than you currently see, or you are going to see in this video. But if I go to the lib map, so over here, the lib map, if you're looking at this, it's just an object which is essentially acting as just a key value store. Not going to get any kind of real deep nesting or anything in it. It's just going to be a key, which is going to be the name of some type of either a system, so within this concept of ECS, it's either going to be usually the name of a system, some type of third-party library, a component, or some entity primitive, some special entity, some type of third-party, some type of other code that I don't want to necessarily just bundle into the engine. But if you call some of the APIs that tap into it under the hood, it will just load it in asynchronously. And here's the thing. That asynchronous kind of loading of these things that's going to happen is crazy awesome. I don't know if you realize that. Because especially paired with the idea that, or the fact that this is going to be a PWA, which in fact it already is, even with this little bit of code that's in here. Paired with the fact that it's a PWA, as you kind of call into these different APIs of the CS1 Global, and kind of, you don't even have to know about it, but basically cause these, asynchronous kind of remote fetches, you will, of these other code, these other libraries and so forth. What you're doing is if you're going to use it, then yeah, we're gonna pack it in there, and it's going to get packed into, like I say again, the PWA, the Progressive Web App. So it'll get packed into the cache. Once it's in that cache, it's never going to. Once you make those API calls in the future, the service worker is going to, it's going to intercept, it's going to proxy all of those requests, HTTP requests, and it's going to say, hey, first of all, is this particular request fulfilled in the cache, in the fresh cache, in the non-stale cache? Is this fulfilled? And if it is, boom, you don't have to go anywhere. So the only cost you pay for kind of like reaching out for extra kind of network calls is that first time you use this. So as users of your applications, your games or whatever, use your application, depending on how you scale out your application, it's only going to pull in these third-party libraries as necessary, and it's going to cache them right into that Progressive Web Application cache, and you get all the beauty of that. So I think that covers that enough. So boom. Let me show a couple other things. Well, the server, let me talk about this. So as I'm developing this, the other package is the server. So here's where I'm developing the CS1 game server. So there's the CS1 game engine, the CS1 game server, the CS1 game socket, and then any demos. Those are all different packages that you can get from NPM. And so I'm developing the server right here. While I'm developing the server, and the server is using, CommonJS. I'm not even it's a Node.js server. You don't have to use this server if you don't want to. You can use the game engine, and you can have a Java server. You can have a Clojure-based Java server. You can have whatever kind of server you want. You can have a Go server. Doesn't matter what the server is. You can still use the game engine on the client. And in the future, I plan on supporting, making adapters for different servers as well. Make it work for, several different servers. Not every kind of server. I'll tell you, I'm not going to dive down a huge number of rabbit holes. Some people will say I've already done that. But I author the server here. Again, it's in CommonJS. So if I go over here, there's not much. You can see all the requires that are in here. It also has in the modules, it also has a version. Notice this time it's not, ES6 modules. It's exporting the module. You don't have to. The version module, again, if you're using my build system, it's dynamically generated for you. So what is my development life like? Well, I just go into whatever source code here in my source directory. If I'm working on the server, I just go in here and I code away in this editor. And then if I want to test it out, at this point, I still got to write my little. I will typically at this point actually, and I just like saying, okay, remember to do this. But I will at this point go and actually put the package out. I will look at the code, um, and I will run a brief test on it, and then I will publish it. Because right now, even in my development environment, I'm running in my main file right here. All I'm doing, look at this. In my development environment, I just require CS1 game server start. That's it. And that's what you could do. If you wanted to set up your own Node.js, if you wanted to go the Node.js route, currently in 1.0, that's all I'm going to be supporting, then you can just simply require the game server dot start, boom, the server's running for you. You don't have to have anything else. It pulls in all the dependencies. It sets up even the flat database for you. It sets up the socket, sets up everything. Literally, it's just require CS1 game server start. You pair that with the what you saw right down there for the what did I have at in the staging, like min hybrid. So if you just did something like that, you can literally just do something like this. That's your client, right? Couple lines of code for your client. Here's your server code. Go back to there. Here's the server code. Here's your server. One line, require CS1 game server start. And you are good to go. You're not going to have authentication, but you can serve. You can use this at the bare minimum. This will be like overkill right now in terms of the way you're using it. But you could use this just for statically serving your game if you just wanted to have a single player without having the socket connection. If you wanted the socket connection, all you would do in addition. So if you wanted to run a multiplayer, and I guess I can show you that. If you wanted to run a multiplayer, all you would do in addition over here, under the game engine right here, you would have an extra script that will say CS1 game socket. So you'd have the CS1 game engine and the game socket. And down here, rather than just game start, because it defaults to single player, you would pass in some configuration object into it. And then by running that start with this configuration object, you can set it to be a multiplayer. You can set the mode. There'll also be an API on the game object here. There'll be an API method call that you can call to configure outside of this passing in an object. So every single step when you're stepping up how you're developing with the game engine, I want it to be logical progressions. So when you're coming in with the game engine, I figure people are just going to pop in the engine and they're going to start inlining inside of a CS1 script. Boom. And they can they can just do it on their own computer. They don't even have to serve it on the website, right? I'm going to have graceful fails if they're not doing things over HTTPS that require HTTPS. I'm going to have some graceful things are going to fail gracefully. So it's going to be super simple onboarding. And they build up confidence working with the engine. They're like, yeah, I really like this. I want to actually make something with it. So you make something with it. It's just going to be a single player app. And you maybe you want to include it with your Gatsby site or, some other type of static site that you're hosting or just on a GitHub, hosted web page, github.io, or whatever. That kind of progression through using the engine and its respective libraries are core in my thoughts. That's kind of like part of my mantra that I go through every morning as I kind of get into contributing to this code base. So What else? Okay, here's some of the commands. I just put this in there. This is not complete. But whenever I'm developing, I jump in, I change the source code, and then I can just run node dev engine, node dev socket, node dev forest. And then if I want to build something, node prod engine, node prod socket, node prod forest. If I want to publish, um, no, I didn't add the publish for the server. Let me actually add that in there right now before I forget about it. And bingo. So npm node pub, all right. And forest is the forest demo right there. It's going to be my first, it's going to be kind of like the flagship demo, if you will. Node pub server. So I basically set up some really nice help scripts here, utility scripts that are at the top level currently. Again, I can just hide these elsewhere under the hood if I wanted to, but again, once I get other contributors, then I want to kind of like talk out the development environment a little bit more. How are they going to do it? How would they like to do it? Contribute. So, but you can just create production builds, create development builds. You can publish to npm. You can npm unpublish. Let me just add that for the server too. It doesn't really matter. I guess I could have just said package name. Well, no, because I made, these are proxies actually for the, so these, when I'm doing node pub server, the actual, or over here, this is unpub. Oh, I should actually fix what I didn't even catch that. Now I did. So I have this unpub. But since I'm doing all of these kind of gratuitous publishings to npm, most people try not to have to unpublish anything. But since I've been actually fixing my system and optimizing it, I'll go back and do a lot of extra publishes, and then I'll go and unpublish them as I'm kind of playing with this system for development. But unpublish, npm publish, unpublish. So these are just some of like the utility script command calls that I make as I'm developing, which is really cool because I'm actually developing. I can develop for a lot of different. Look, I'm developing technically. I don't have four, right? I'm developing for 4 different, if you want to say 4 different libraries that kind of make the whole engine platform. There's actually 4 different libraries, complementary libraries that work together, however you want to name that. And they all have their own NPM kind of packages and their own versioning. So how do you do all of that? And they're kind of interdependent too. How can you deal with all those interdependent packages that you're the maintainer of and do all of that in this online environment? Well, you can, and it's easy. Whoa, for all of you like just using whatever Vim or just only Vim or VS Code or whatever else you're using as your development environment, you're working in a container or something and you're SSHing in or whatever. Yeah, those are all great ways of developing it, whatever works for you, but believe it or not, this works. Glitch. Yeah, so a lot of cool things going on here. Once I publish something, for example, it's right up there on npm. So if I go to npm, you can see I have like a huge number of CS1 game server, a huge number of 12 versions, and I've already kind of went back and unpublished a bunch of them, but I still at this point have like 12. I have to go back and I just feel this is like overkill to have all these versions and they don't even work. They were just like early tests. But anyway, I mean, it just works, right? It just works, and that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, if I update the server, publish the server, all I have to do is just reinstall. When I publish the server, I should actually even automate the script after it publishes the server to reinstall the new one locally. But yeah, so I'm always thinking all these extra little scripts to add. So I'll put a little hook into that. But if I go into logs here, for example, if you look through the logs, so it logs out the users that are in the flat database. Only there's admin on this one. Tells you the server. This is the server log. The CS1 game server 0.0.17. It says it's writing the service worker file. So it actually writes, right? It actually, you don't have to worry about, because if you know anything about these service workers, they have to be hosted at the same domain, served up as a separate file from the same domain. You can't just like use, object URLs created from blobs or anything. You literally have to have it served up. So, but I dynamically generate that file, service worker file. When you're and I have a game server config file that if you want to get more fancy with the server down the road, I'll have that option as well. I'm just printing out a test, the config, and then you can see the server's running. Like if you wanted to configure the server to have a different type of service worker with a different type of caching strategy, then you could, and I'll build that kind of thing into it. But for right now, that's what I got, man. All right, so that's right there in the logs. Where do I execute? If you're not familiar with glitch, I can just go into the terminal and I can run those, like the commands that you see up here. So if I was running, yeah, I have another window open, in fact, already. So let's look through, let's look back at some things I've already done before. So I previously updated what was I doing here? So this is the one where I was manually, this is like too much code to type. I better automate that. So I'm like looking at that. That's way too much to type in the terminal. So I'm installing the updated game server after I published it. Look, so I published the server. Once that, and then look at the nice output here. It versioned it, updated the version, published to NPM. It tells me, hey, this is where it resides on NPM. So I just have to make the hook to the end of that process so that it kicks off this script. But I'm always trying to, of course, automating, making your life easier as a developer is the most important. No, it isn't the most important thing. It's definitely up there. So then it swaps it out with the previous version down here, and then it restarts. Now with the refresh, what it does is it pushes out the file changes from this this shell environment over to the actual project. And here I run node dev engine. So this makes a development build of the game engine. When it's a development build, it automatically points that development build output in an unminimized form to the staging area, which is just accessed over here. If I look over here, here's the staging area. It's just the base URL /staging. Very easy to understand. So whenever the game is firing up, it tells, I'm not going to intercept these. I'm being transparent. Hey, yeah, A-frames under the hood. This is their custom version of, 3JS, super medium custom version. So, and then I'm also customizing their A-frame, but I don't, take out their logs. It's good to see that, but I further customized theirs. You can see over here, I have my own, custom name on there. And then we have some things, some event kind of console logs here, initializing the game system. So at that point, I know when it's doing that, that means that for one thing, I know that the DOM content is loaded, and I know at that point that the hydration is happening. I know that basically A-frame is bootstrapping at that point. It's not necessarily done. A-frame is bootstrapping though, because it's initializing the game system, which is part of the bootstrapping process. And then I detect that there is already a scene in this page. So if I look at this particular staging page, you will see that there is already, and let me go to that. So I'll go to public and staging. And in the index, I already have a scene right here, an A scene with a box in it. So it detects that because it's different. You can imagine that if I didn't have a scene, and I don't need to declare a scene there, but if I did declare a scene, it kind of takes a slightly different path in the the bootstrapping process for the game engine. And and that's what it was outputting right there. It was saying that there was a scene detected that was HTML declared, and then it's saying it notices the scene is not playing, which means at this point it detected the scene, but in other words, by the scene not being played at that point, that is also indicating that even at this point, A-frame hasn't fully mounted or bootstrapped or hydrated, whatever terms you would like to use. That hasn't occurred yet because this scene would be playing if it had been completed its bootstrapping. So what I do is I set a load handler at that point since the scene's not playing. I actually leave the possibility in there if it happened to load. So if everything happened in a certain way that the scene was playing at that point, boom, then I don't have to go for some scene load event. So I'm kind of doing this branching control structures very fluidly. Again, this is part of the whole CS1 script, allowing really as fast as feasible, getting to that time to interaction, minimizing that time to interaction as much as possible without the developer having to worry about basically, data races, these requests firing in different orders and so forth, and so forth. Anything that comes up, as you know, with the asynchronous systems, especially on startup. So here we can see the service worker is registered the service worker. Again, you didn't even have to think about service worker or even know what a PWA was, and you're still going to be benefiting from this. You're basically going to be able to call these simple APIs that dynamically, asynchronously load in other code and even assets, 3D models, blah, whatever, that load other stuff. You don't even have to think about that as a game developer here. You can if you want to, but you don't have to think about it, and it will cache them. Boom, behind the scenes. That service worker will make it so that in the future, after you load it the first time, you don't have to make those network. You don't have to go out to the network to fetch those anymore, because the service worker will proxy those requests and notice, hey, yeah, this request is handled by the cache, so we're just going to give you what's in the cache. And then over here, we finally have the scene loaded event, which means, hey, now everything that's inside of that script is ready to go. So the scene loaded means the scene is now playing. In that case, since the scene is playing, we can now run what's ever inside of that CS1 script. So you see the benefit of that script. That script tag, it needs to be in the body just to have that, just to be interpreted right there as a custom element. But beyond that, you get all of this worry-free development in terms of the events again, by just being able to access the really easy, meaningful, performant, domain-specific language-based APIs, and just get your game prototype and get on the world. Get your game started, man. Get that game started. All right, so that's it, and then so that's the staging endpoint. If I would load the, so let's actually fire. Let's see how fast this fires up. The server's probably asleep at this point, so probably it will take a while because this is on glitch. So you'll see what, and we go over here, hit that, and go hit the. So I'm going to hit the production endpoint at this point, and since I wasn't over in glitch for a while, it literally goes to sleep if there hasn't been any calls to it for 5 minutes, which I was sitting here talking guaranteed for more than 5 minutes. So let me just, matter of fact, let me just refresh this whole page. We'll probably see, or actually let me skip that. Let me see if this seems to be up and going. Let me go to the logs. And boom, boom. So I'm not logging whenever a request is coming, every time a request is coming in. So you could, maybe in the future, I will have like a different levels, logging levels, that you can set, like when you're starting your server. If you wanted to start your server with different types of logging settings, I can have them set for logging things at the kind of like socket level, log, socket messages, log just static asset calls or any other APIs that you might build on top of, maybe because it uses Express under the hood. So any type of other maybe endpoints that you create on top of this. But I'll get into that. I even expose on the server, I'll expose the game server, I'll expose the Express app as, so I didn't show that. That's one other thing I could show. But if I go to the server, let me close this, close that. If I go into the server, so I could say server equals require CS1 game server. Then I could say server.app dot, and then I can whatever use. So if you're familiar with the use API with Express, you can say .use and then some type of middleware that you're adding in there. So if you wanted to do some other type of have some other endpoints, like this game is going to reside, maybe you want to use this server for your main server, you can, and still have a multi-page application, or at least other APIs that you can hit, that you can provide like kind of some middleware processing or whatever you want. So basically I'm saying that even under the hood, so you're going to have access to, and if I jump in here to the source, into the server, what are the dependencies here for the server? So I'm going to expose, make easily, so the Express is going to be exposed, the Express app is going to be exposed as .app, the socket is going to be exposed, obviously, is, so probably just .io, and then over here, the utilities, the server-side utilities, I will also just tack those on as little properties as well. I'll have like server.utils, and then if I build out anything more than this, I don't want to put them all at the top level. I'll probably, and you can even see over here when I export the server object down here, basically just have right now a configure method and a start method. In this case, I don't even have the app. Did I say? I did not. So I didn't even say CS1 server. I didn't even put an app, but on the other project where I worked further through this, I did. But I'll expose certain things on the CS1 server object, like the Express app and everything, so that you can extend it and just use this as your base server. Yeah. So just trying to be as thoughtful as possible. Please reach out, get in touch with me. If you're not interested in this, but just want to maintain kind of like projects that you are libraries that you kind of publish to NPM with, I have a simpler version of this. I built this, actually extended my maintainer project at Glitch, so you can look into that. I have another YouTube video out on that. But that's only for really maintaining one library. I just extended that, hacking around with it to support, support 4 different libraries now. I'll eventually have a bunch of demos, so who knows whatever other parts I'll have to this. I might even end up having like 10 different libraries supported in this one little online. Isn't that amazing? Who would have thought like 10 years ago that this would be where we'd be at today? But if you're interested in what you see right here, please reach out, man. It's just like I'm trying to be the sole unicorn on this, and I tell you what, man, it is inspiring. But I tell you what, it's starting to get a little bit overwhelming at times. It would be great to have somebody else to delve into this with me. But that said, okay, there's my sales pitch. Great talking to you. If you hung in this long, wow, you deserve a real big prize. Bye-bye.